because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are, and we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
Welcome to Cows in the Field. This is a show in which we discuss philosophical themes in popular films. My name is Justin.
I'm Laura.
And today we dig into the second Cronenberg film we've done on this podcast. We're talking about the 1986 film, The Fly.
I think you're making a mistake. I think you really want to talk to me.
Sorry, I have 3 other interviews to do before this party's over.
Yeah, but they're not working on something that'll change the world as we know it.
They say they are.
Yeah, but they're lying.
There is a limit, even to the imagination.
Human teleportation, molecular decimation, breakdown, and reformation is inherently purging.
Where our greatest creations meet our deepest fears.
Something went wrong, Seth. When you went through, something went wrong.
You are about to go beyond that limit.
And we're happy to welcome to the show Becca Rothfeld. Becca is the nonfiction book critic at the Washington Post, an editor at The Point, and a contributing editor at the Boston Review. She's the author of the recent book, All Things Are Too Small, which we will discuss more today. Welcome to the show, Becca.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thank you for suggesting that we do The Fly. I knew that a Cronenberg would be a good bet, and then you suggested The Fly in particular. I mean, I know that's one that you've written about in the essay, which is called All Good Sex is Body Horror, but appears in the book as The Flesh.
The flesh, it makes you crazy.
Yeah, it makes you crazy.
That's
a great line. And I want to start with the question, so how did The Fly in particular as a movie influence, if at all, you're thinking about the transformative erotic encounter?
So I had been thinking about transformative experiences, but not erotic encounters as transformative. I eloped with my husband after I had known him for about a month. And so when we were trying to decide whether to elope, because this is the kind of people we are, we read L.A. Paul's book, Transformative Experiences. We're thinking about how marriage is a transformative experience. Maybe there's not a really irrational way to decide in advance whether you should get married, at least by way of appealing to traditional decision theory. And so we were like, it'll be kind of like a leap of faith because it will probably transform us. I think it has. But that book is not really about sort of physicality. It's much more about how one is changed at the level of values and so on. So that book was kind of in the back of my mind. And then every October, I try to watch a horror movie every day. So I'm in the middle of that again. And I just watched The Fly and I was like, wow, this is such an incredibly ecstatic, exuberant, disgusting, fleshy representation of this thing that I've just been reading about in this much more abstract register. And so then I started to think about sort of physical transformation, and that led me to thinking of erotic exchange as a transformative experience.
Is great. We need to dig into all of this. But
yeah, Justin also pulled that book out when we were talking about making babies.
I did.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah, and I was like, I'm not a philosopher. And so Justin was like, it's like, you know, you don't know what it's going to be like to be a vampire is like, you don't know what it's going to be like to be a parent. And I was like, what?
Laura was basically like,
kind of makes sense.
I mean, it does, but I was like, shush.
Yeah, Laura was like, does that actually make less sense to me? Because vampirism? But so I should mention to listeners of this show, we have talked very, very briefly about Laurie Paul's book in the context of I Saw the TV Glow, where we talked to Emily St. James about just so, and also for Laura to know, which is a movie about a very transformative experience, but also the kind of the fear leading up to taking that step into the transformative experience. And I think one of the things that Laurie's book really captures is, and puts in analytic philosopher speak, is that kind of, there are some transitions that you may make that will change your fundamental values, which makes it difficult to assess the rationality of the decision prior to making it, because you're not then in a position to evaluate whether it's going to go good if this thing happens, or bad if this thing happens, because on the other side of the transformation on one of these choices is a radically different set of values than the ones you currently have. So let's talk about, in particular, then erotic transformation in the context of this film. So tell us a bit about how you're thinking of the erotic and of transformation and their connection.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have like necessary and sufficient conditions at hand, but I do think that the erotic probably involves physicality to some extent, and desires. And so I think that it is desires that you can't predict, physical desires involving the way that your body relates to other bodies, that in an erotic encounter, one can't predict how one's desires and one's physical manifestation of those desires will be transformed by the other person's physicality. And so I also say some things in the book about how this might impact the way that we might think about consent. We shouldn't think about consent, I argue, as something that you can use decision theory to think about. You can't assign value to the way that you will experience sex in advance because you don't know how the sexual encounter, if it is sufficiently erotic, will transform your values and your desires and your experience of yourself as a physical being. And so that means that you should think of consent as kind of a license for transformation as opposed to a guarantee of safety or a guarantee of enjoyment. I think that answered part of your question.
Yeah, let's go off there. So, I mean, I think one thing that's really interesting about this notion of the erotic is I think there's a more, I don't know, maybe mundane notion where erotic is just having to do with carnality and sexuality. So things that are erotic are just like things that turn you on. And you're thinking of the erotic as something which is much more, in a certain sense, dangerous because you're putting yourself in a position, you're sort of putting yourself out there, you're risking shame and embarrassment and so on. And in particular, you're doing that, of course, in private, but with another person. So there's these sort of two dimensions of your way of thinking about it, that it's sort of other directed and reciprocal in that way, but also that it carries this sense of what's the word, like risk to it. And I think, do you want to elaborate more on that or?
Maybe just one thing that I would say is that I think that I draw a lot of parallels between erotic experience and experiences of art in the book. One thing that's distinct is that your experience of art is not reciprocal, I guess, depending on the kind of art it is. If it's like interactive performance art or something, it is. But if it's like reading a book or watching a film, it's not.
Yeah.
But the claim is that both of these things are, the claim that's made implicitly throughout the book is that both art and encounters with other people, if they're working correctly, should disturb and challenge you rather than leaving you intact. And kind of the measure of a successful work of art, much like a successful erotic encounter, is that you are different after it.
Yeah. And different. So in the case of the erotic, do you have to be different physically, or just you can be different as maybe dispositionally in your behavior or different in the way you see things?
I mean, I suppose the erotic is not easily disentangleable from the romantic. And so people are changing you erotically, or they're probably also changing you romantically. But I think that at the very least, your physical desires and your experience of your body are changed.
Yeah.
And I guess one further thing to say is that I don't think that every sexual encounter is erotic. In fact, I think that the majority of sexual encounters are pretty disappointing by this measure. People come to them with their preconceptions sort of ready at hand, impose them on their partner, and leave pretty much unchanged. But I don't think that that's what erotic encounters should be like, as I argue in the essay.
Yeah. I mean, but it's also open. You're open to the idea that there could be sort of good sex, and that is sex that's fulfilling and joyful. That's not erotic, right? Erotic, it's a different kind of value to the sexual encounter, and it does, as you put it, doesn't have to only be the locus. Doesn't always have to be a sexual encounter. It can be an encounter with art. Presumably, if it can be an encounter with art, it could be an encounter with literature or any kind of media, presumably.
Yes. And well, I'm not sure that I would say that all of those kinds of encounters are erotic, but I would say that they have the same sort of structure as the erotic. I guess I have to think at some future date when I write some future thing saying what I think the erotic is exactly, whether it encompasses encounters with like more than just people, for example. To me, it sounds very intuitive to say that you can have like an erotic encounter with a painting. But when I would say things like this in graduate school, my advisor would be like, what? I don't think that's intuitive. So I don't know if I think that that's true, but I think that one of the things that is valuable about erotic experience is that it is transformative, and that's also true of experiences of art.
Yeah, I see.
And I do think that you can have sex that is kind of ethically unobjectionable that isn't erotic, but I do think that there is ethical value to erotic sex, which is that I think that there is something ethically valuable about allowing yourself to be surprised by another person as opposed to kind of imposing your pre-existent desires on the other person. I think I quote Iris Murdoch to this effect in the book. So
Yeah.
maybe there's something super erogatory about having erotic sex.
Yeah,
I guess.
I mean, exactly how it sits in the axis of value is we don't have to settle that here, but the idea being that there's this distinctive value of a kind of erotic sex, which is a kind of has risks to it, and I think that's a really interesting idea. How does this relate to the film The Fly?
Good question. So I'm sure there's many ways to read this movie that are good. I mean, I think Cronenberg himself at one point has said that he thinks of it as a dramatization of the aging process. And of course, the film supports that reading. But I read it as somebody who is so physically disheveled by his experience of passionate desire for another person that he transforms into a fly. And I see it as illustrating the danger implicit in eroticism, because something else I say in the book that I think is true is that often in accounts of erotic experience as transformative, it's depicted as rosily transformative. You'll transform into something beautiful and lovely. There's an E. Cummings poem to this effect. For example, or sort of a lot of the popular discourse around love is like, you'll be changed in a beautiful way. And I think that The Fly shows that actually there is profound danger. You can't tell what will happen to your body when you fall passionately in love with somebody. You could turn into a fly.
Yeah. So let's talk now a little bit about Brundle's transformation, because I think this will set us in that course a little bit. So
I love saying Brundle, by the way.
Brundle is the best name of a character. Only
Brundle.
Only
good mouth feel, as they say.
Yes. Only bettered by Stathis.
Yeah, Stathis is an insane name. I completely forgot that her ex-boyfriend's name is Stathis.
At first, I thought like that was his last name. She was just referring to him by his last name, but that's his first name.
Yeah.
Yes.
Last
Like
name.
a staph infection. That was what I kept thinking of when I would address him.
Stathis Borons. Borons is his name. So Seth Brundle's is kind of, nerdy, shut-in, antisocial guy who gets sick anytime he moves too fast. Mm-hmm. I love that aspect of his character. So he basically is living in a pre-COVID lockdown. He never really leaves his house, and he's always ordering his food in. We see him ordering Chinese food over the phone, like he's got the number memorized. It's clear this guy just, if he had Postmates, he would be their number one customer. Anyway, so Seth Brundle, he meets Veronica Quaife, played by Gina Davis, at this party. She comes back to his place. He shows her teleportation, yada, yada, yada. Eventually, she sort of agrees to write a book about him. And they have sex, and because she sort of falls in love with him, or is beginning to fall in love with him. They have sex. The next day, soon thereafter, he successfely I should say this all.
He doesn't successfully teleport himself, in fact.
Yeah. So
he does. He gets a baboon in there.
So hold on. I missed the central thing to connect to your stuff thing, Becca. So he, the next day he has an insight, which is that he has previously been unable to teleport flesh. And the reason is suggested by Veronica when she is just so enamored with him that she's like, I want to eat you up. And the flesh just, it just makes you crazy. And that's where he has this insight.
The flesh. It should make the computer crazy, like those old ladies pinching babies. But it doesn't, not yet. I haven't taught the computer to be made crazy by the flesh, the poetry, the steak. So I'm going to start teaching it now.
I think he even says I have to make the computer crazy with the flesh.
Yes. I kind of missed that the first time I watched it, and I was stunned upon re-seeing it that it kind of recast a lot of his relationship with her as a kind of experiment in which he's trying to teach himself the lore of the flesh so that he can teach the computer.
Yeah.
So it calls pre-transformation Brundle into question for me in a way that I wasn't thinking about it when I wrote the essay.
Yeah. And he programs the computer. That enables the computer to successfully transport a baboon. I love that it's a baboon and not a rat or something. But anyway, we had seen him previously unsuccessfully transport a baboon, and we get this great like inside out baboon on the other end. We also learned that the way this machine works is it does like a molecular scan. It disintegrates you and then rematerializes you. It basically reconstructs you. And that's a thing that comes up again and again in this movie. They talk about reconstructing yourself, like I'm reconstructed and I've made going through this process of being what is he like? He says like atomized and then reconstructed or something. That's what he thinks after, he goes through, he is giving him all this power. But anyway, so he does this. They are now beginning to fall in love. She even at one point suggests that they go on a vacation like an old couple. And he's like, oh, we're having a romance. And, but then she sees her old ex-boyfriend Stathis coming into the picture. He's messing around. He sent Brundle something because she's ostensibly supposed to be working for Stathis, but she's kind of gone rogue and she's doing this book project on the side. She doesn't really want anything to do with Stathis. Stathis is a real creep. And he sent something to Brundle and she's like, I've got to go deal with this. And she leaves to go confront Stathis and basically just be like, get out of my life. But Brundle gets drunk and in a fit of jealousy. Now, this is interesting because before this moment, before the sexual encounter, he was a pretty cautious guy. He doesn't leave the house. He was saying like, okay, we've successfully done the baboon, but we're not going to put a human through until we've done weeks and weeks of testing on this baboon. There's no reason to rush this. But then as he gets drunk, he's jealous. He thinks maybe she's gone off with her old boyfriend, Stathis, and he puts himself through the machine. And in this moment of incautiousness, the fly enters in the machine. He doesn't see it. And we begin the central sort of plot of this film. But I do think it's really interesting that his, the path from sex to fly is mediated by all these steps. He has to be changed both in that he has to become a little crazy by the flesh, which is, has this guy ever had sex before? Unclear. He's, is this a deflowering event? I don't know. But he has been made crazy by the flesh. He translates that into the computer. But it's that in that moment of like what he's now experiencing potentially for the first time, that is jealousy for the first time, that then he is like, that breaks him. That sort of is what screws him up and makes him make this mistake. And I do think that, so to your point about the reading is like, he is, in a way, it's like, yes, the sex does turn him into a fly. It's a series of dominoes that gets there, but...
And he thinks that it seems like he thinks that he's making a kind of rational decision. I mean, in some ways, it's kind of a perfect allegory for the message of transformative experience, which is he thinks that he's making a kind of rational decision because he thinks that he's grasped the flesh, he's taught the computer about the flesh, and he thinks he understands exactly what's going to happen when he gets in the pod. But in fact, it's impossible for him to make a rational decision because the computer's interpretation of the flesh is actually not this rational thing that he thought he had taught it.
Well, on that point, I think that there's this theme that's in a lot of Cronenberg films, which is like, it tends to be men who are icked out and concerned about more fleshly things, and then they try to tame them with their minds. This is in particular, you get this in The Brood, you get this in Videodrome and Dead Ringers to a certain extent. And it's this, and in the
early movies too, there's like a doctor. I mean, the doctor should be trying to tame it, but there's like this epidemic of parasites, like nymphomaniac parasites that turn people into nymphomaniac zombies. And the doctor in this apartment complex where everybody's getting the parasite is trying to exert mastery over the erotic by treating the parasite and ultimately fails.
It's this thing of like, can we? I mean, this is a very if you abstract enough, this is like the history of philosophy in some sense, because it's like tends to be a bunch of men, but it doesn't have to be, but who are like, we can use reason to tame this chaos that is the flesh, that is like the material world. We can make sense of it with our minds. Everything will just make sense if we can think about it and use logic and that kind of thing. And that's what all these Cronenbergian, typically male protagonists are trying to do too. But then in Cronenberg's world, they almost always fail. This is shown to be a folly. And in fact, it's his attempts to sort of, and you see it. So here's where it is happening in The Fly. He's got this thing, he's exposed to the craziness of the flesh, and then he's like, I know what to do with this. I'll program a computer to understand this, so I can like tame it by algorithmizing it into a computer. But again, the folly is that he is human, and his failure is like is this not realized, is becoming jealous and being subject to all the whims that are non-rational or not tameable by by reason. And that just shows like that there are some things that are, in Cronenberg's mind, at least, outside of the domain of reason that can't be, fully
for sure
explicated.
And like the domain of predictability and like human mastery. And now that you've said this, I keep thinking of like more and more movies like Scanners too. Scientists are kind of trying to do a project to control the scanners, and it fails. They can't. The scanners are these people who can do crazy things with their minds.
Yeah. Have you seen Scanners,
I
Laura?
have not seen Scanners.
Oh, you're gonna love Scanners. It's
like a really good one.
It's like
there's exploding heads.
Yeah,
in it.
I do know that. If I know one thing about Scanners, is that the head explodes.
It's the parts leading up to the head explosions that's the best, because there's a lot of like guys being like looking constipated, and it's hilarious. It's so funny. This movie, by the way, I think is hilarious. I found so much of this movie funny. Especially like all the like Jeff Goldblum as he's like muttering to himself as he's decaying.
You're a relic. Yes, you are. You can't deny it. Vestigial, archaeological, redundant. Artifacts of a bygone era. Of historical interest only.
I mean, I'm like at that point curled into a ball because of all the goo that's occurring. But I do like that the exuberant the exuberant Brundle before he starts flying out. Like, he's really fun when he's just like in full rant mode. Because as you pointed out, just like we watched the first half of this movie, we're like, it's a very subdued Jeff Goldblum performance. But you forget he's holding it back for when he's doing the uneven bars and screaming about cannolis in restaurants.
When he's just eating a ton of like sweet things, like compulsively, I love that part.
And just trolling around bars, like trying to find some lady to shove into a pod.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite portion of the movie before her fingernails start coming off, and then I start having to take deep breaths.
I mean, I actually just want to dwell a little bit on the transformation again, just because, what is, if you think about it, like, the sex kicks it off, but it's his own kind of hubris that leads to the fly. It's him thinking, I could just do this. Like, and it's of course based on jealousy, but it's like, it's his inbuilt, in some sense, or, all too human character flaws that lead ultimately to the moment of incautiousness. I mean, maybe you just shouldn't be putting humans in telepods, but you might think that, like, he might have been able to do it at one point.
He's called a shot when when he takes her out. He's like, you will write a book about me and it will end with me getting in the pod and transporting myself. Yeah. He just upped his timeline because he was crazy with flesh.
Yeah.
But he did have that hubris to think he was going to, not only could he do it with humans, but he was going to be the first one to move.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that he seems really certain that he understands the consequences of what he's doing in advance. There seems to be no recognition that perhaps this experience will transform him. I mean, even if there hadn't been a fly, like, you don't actually know in what way you're transformed by having your molecules dissolved and reassembled or whatever it is that happens. And in fact, he's waiting for tests on the baboon to come back, and he imprudently decides to go into the thing before he knows if the baboon is actually even the same.
Yeah. He also says, just on the just transformation thing, he says he's talking about about it as a disease, and he says, it's not so bad, it wants to change me into something else. That's not so bad, is it? Most people would give anything to be changed into something else. And I
love that line. Yeah. It's so poignant and sad. I mean, it's crazy how sad this movie is able to be, because it sounds like it would be so ridiculous and comedic. And it is funny, but it's also like profoundly sad, almost tragic movie. Like, I cry whenever I watch it.
Totally. So actually, yeah. So the idea that you might be, he at the beginning of the film is deeply sad, and he feels initially, before he begins to decay, once he comes out of the pod, initially extremely powerful. And he talks about himself. Actually, there's some quotes here that I think are kind of interesting. The way he describes himself, he says,
You know, I just don't think I've ever given me a chance to be me. But, of course, interestingly, at the exact same moment that I achieved what will probably prove to be my life's work, that's the moment when I started being the real me finally. So, listen, not to wax messianic, but it may...
He's talking about like his previous life, and he's actually talking about it in a wistful way. He's already realized that he's been changed by this. I mean, he doesn't realize he's going to change into a fly, but he already thinks he's a different person. And he is. I mean, he's behaving so extrovertedly, and previously he was very introvertedly. He's out and about, and he has pride maybe as more than before. And anyway, but he has a lot of energy at least. And it reminded me of like just from my experience, that the way I can relate to Brundle is as somebody who's often gripped by immense amounts of anxiety, and to the point where it's like, I wouldn't like want to get on a plane and stuff. And to go from that to, after dealing with that for many years and finding ways of managing it, to being able to do things which to other people are incredibly easy and mundane, but you do feel like a superhuman. You feel like, I could do this thing now that was previously so difficult for me. And I think that's kind of one of his initial experience with the transformation is really quite positive, in that he feels like energized because he feels like he's been set free. And then to have that, and of course the other thing about that is that he's found his true love, maybe. I mean, this is the first time he's experienced romantic love, perhaps. And then to have that all taken away from him sort of slowly is quite tragic. And sad, and I mean, not to mention the toll it's going to take on Veronica, who we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, and his life before was, I mean, I think anxiety was maybe a certain aspect of it as well, but also just like this sort of slavish devotion to one project and precision and efficiency. Like the fact he's got all of he wears all the same clothes, which is played for laughs. He got the idea from Einstein, but like, there's no self-expression in that, right? Yeah. He doesn't have any space for it. All of his creativity, all of his intellectual energy is just focused into one project, and it's like suffocating him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's no spontaneity, like all the clothing being exactly the same. There's a real emphasis on sort of predictability. And when he's explaining why the computer keeps getting things wrong, he kind of says something that's also sort of true of him, which is like, you have to tell the computer exactly what to do. And that's what he's like at the beginning. Like, it needs precise instructions. It can't innovate. It can't act spontaneously. It's just really following like the precise program that you put into it. And so that's what his life is like before. And so initially it seems like he's being spontaneous. He's doing all these like insane acrobatics, like in his laboratory. He also kind of seems like he's having like a manic episode.
Yeah.
I mean, increasingly. And then he's a fly.
Then he a fly. Well, the other way. So speaking of tragedy, I mean, I this time I was watching the movie and thinking this is a gothic horror, because it's the whole thing is, a lot of these gothic horror things. I'm thinking in particular here of like Dracula and like Phantom of the Opera, and I'm sure many others that Becca, you've read so much more than me that you can tell us about. But I mean, like, it's just thinking like, first of all, it's like a romance, but it's this romance between this woman who falls in love with this, social outcast, or this disfigured creature that lives in an abandoned castle and can't come out. And then her love of him is basically to like redeem or protect him. But then in the end, like, there's always this third guy, the character of in Jonathan Harker in Dracula, or like Raoul in The Phantom, who ends up like saving the day. But he's kind of this milquetoast like guy that actually isn't that cool and sexy, but like ultimately does save the day and come in. But I just think it is interesting that Cronenberg seems to have like, figured this film in that format of the gothic horror. And of course those are tragedies. I mean, Dracula is a tragedy. I mean, I feel sad for Dracula at the end of Dracula. I mean, he's on certain tellings of the story, it's like he's driven by love just as well. But anyway, yeah. But do you feel, does that resonate with you?
Yes, I have so many things to say about that. I mean, I think that part of the tragedy is that I think that you're right. I mean, I think in a way, the sort of traditional structure of Gothic horror, obviously the hero is the milquetoast guy. And yet there's something so deflating always in these stories about the female protagonist ending up with the milquetoast guy instead of with this person who has induced transformative erotic experience. I mean, I hadn't thought explicitly of vampire narratives as, I had thought of them obviously as sort of narratives of debauchery. In the traditional vampire novels, the vampires come in the windows of the women at night, and then there's blood on the sheets in the morning. Obviously, it's like a debauchery narrative, but I hadn't thought of it, vampirism, as a thing in TV or whatever, as kind of an allegory for erotic transformation. And it so obviously is. And you're always rooting in a way for the vampire, because the vampire is the interesting person who's transforming generally the woman who he's seducing. So I think one reason why it's tragic is that at least Brundle, soon to be Brundlefly, has taken the risks to have this kind of interesting experience. And as he says, like, this is what you have to do to have a kind of a different life. Like, most people would give anything to be transformed into someone else. And yet the risk implicit in that means that even though he's the one who's displayed the courage to be transformed and to transform someone else, his life is destroyed. This also makes me think of Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Francis Ford Coppola adaptation of Dracula, where one is pleased, I think, or at least this viewer is pleased that in that movie, the female protagonist ends up with Dracula and is really into Dracula just openly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, we don't want him with Jonathan. I mean, we love
especially
Keanu.
Jonathan as played by Keanu Reeves.
Big fans of Coppola's film of Dracula here. Yeah, so let's think about it from Veronica's perspective, though. So because this is not her story, but it very much is. She's this central part of this, and it's her holding the gun at the end of the film, having done the second most consequential action of the film. But she refuses to take that step, to take in, to go on this transformative experience. And she's proven right in this case, but she is nonetheless, has to be the one who kills the person she loves, and has to be, is it worse to have to kill the person you love or to be saved by the asshole you hate? I'm not sure which is worse, but so in that sense, it's Veronica's story is quite tragic too. But anyway, I'm curious what you guys think about just her as a character.
You feel really bad for her. I mean, in a way, though, you kind of resent her. I mean, another way that you could read this film, and it's natural to me to do this because I just recovered from thyroid cancer, which is not like transforming into a fly, but was like kind of a horrifying physical experience, is that he's undergoing this horrifying, terrifying physical experience. And he says at one point very movingly, "I'm scared." And she kind of just like leaves him alone. She doesn't really check in on him as much as she like ought to check in on him. Of course, he's turning into a fly and he's dangerous. And maybe if she checked in, he would like abduct her or liquefy her with his like acid saliva or whatever. But nonetheless, you kind of feel like she's more concerned that she ends up being pregnant with his child. She's really concerned for herself. But she doesn't really spend as much time with him throughout this horrifying transformation as one would wish. And so I kind of, in this rewatching, resented her.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I was feeling like she was checking in on him a lot. I was putting, maybe I'm a bad person, but I was just like, I would have fled completely because he would have freaked me out as soon as he got gooey. But I think Gina Davis does a really good job of showing us that how devastated she is and how terrified she is by his change and like how of that loss, because I feel like she doesn't check in on him as much as we might wish, just because like it's so devastating for her, which is selfish, of course, but I think she does a good job playing that. I love her character. I feel for Ronnie.
I mean, let's also not forget that she is when he demands that she get in the pod and she says no, understandably, because he's behaving like a lunatic, he then says, all right, fuck you. And he goes out and picks up a chick at a bar, brings her back.
It's not great.
And then when Veronica comes over, he's with some other chick. And then she confronts him and she's like, well, look, I you got fly hair on you. And he's like, no, come on. And then he like, yells at her again. And then they're apart for a few weeks, because then the next call is,
he's like, please come see me.
He says, come see me. I know it's been a few weeks. I couldn't see you during that time. So he's basically cut off connections with her. He's basically told her, don't come, whatever. And then she does come at his request, and he looks like a demon. And she immediately says, I want to help you. And he says, you can't. She's like, I want to take you to a doctor. You should go to a doctor. And he's like, no, I don't want to be, subject to tests or whatever. He says something like this. Like, I don't want to be a lab rat or something. But then, that scene does, it's interesting because he's at this point, like, completely beset with depression and everything. And he says, like, no, nothing can cure me. I'm just going to like die. And then he hugs her and he says, help me. So he's pulled in these two directions. And so I have sympathy. I actually have a lot of sympathy for her, because I'm like, I mean, she fell in love with this guy. He screwed up and became a fly. And like, what is she supposed to do about it? Like, I don't know. She still loves him, and he's like pushed her away, and he's turned into this monster. I don't know. I feel like in some ways, like, she is the more tragic character because her agency wasn't involved in the flying. I mean, I guess because she had sex with him, but it's really his decisions and poor decisions that led to this. And then she ends up basically being forced to come along for the ride. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably being a bit harsh, but I think one of the saddest scenes in the movie is she goes to visit him to tell him that she's pregnant with his child, and it's unclear whether the child has fly DNA or not. She leaves. She finds that she can't tell him because she's so distressed by how rapidly he's deteriorated. Yeah. She goes back outside where Stathis is waiting for her. And unbeknownst to her, he's listening to their conversation. He's out on the roof of the building where his lab is. And she says something like, I want it out of me. And she keeps referring to like the baby as it, but then refers to him as it too. And he's looking, and he's kind of a fly already, but he has just like this horrible, like wounded expression. And it's not her fault. It would be horrifying to be pregnant with possibly a fly. I like the Rosemary's Baby-esque like pregnancy horror moment in this movie, and I feel that. But I feel like the real tragedy in this movie is like watching how he feels as he becomes repugnant to someone that he loves, which is would be a horrifying part of having like a terrible illness. Luckily, thyroid cancer doesn't really transform you in any fly-like ways. You just get your thyroid removed, and that's all. So I didn't have to experience that.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And when he confronts her later about it, I think he says something along the lines of like, don't kill our baby. But then he says, don't kill like the last thing that's human about me.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that is really painful.
I mean, this is again a theme in a lot of this Gothic horror. I mean, in particular in like the Phantom of the Opera, with like, he wears the mask but he wants to be seen without the mask. He wants her to love him for him. And that's what, Brundle, that shot actually of where I think it's from below and he's looking up. That's like one of the ones that cued me to that this is a kind of Gothic horror, because he's like, this deformed creature in the abbey or whatever,
the hunchback
or the hunchback or whatever. He's like in the shadows, and he's sad because he's been rejected ultimately. Yeah, but I think that is right. I mean, it's a tough situation to be in. I mean, I don't plan on becoming a fly anytime soon, Laura, but if I do, I would ask that you would ask that we make
stand by me, a 3 family in one body.
That part is really intense.
Romance.
That is romance.
It is romance. No, like he's all in on transformation, and he's just like, listen, like let's just all be together. Love is wanting no separation between you and the other person. You want them in your body, and I want the baby in my body, all one body. Let's do this thing. She's just a coward, honestly.
Yeah, truly. She should have done it.
Oh my God.
Because that's the thing that will make him human. Like, it's interesting that like his initial union with her is the thing that prompts him to become inhuman. But then the only way for him to become human, he queries the computer and it tells him, is that he has to merge with somebody who has more human DNA than he does. So the only way for him to return to humanity is to have like another transformative experience. But that isn't possible because Ronnie does not want to become part fly, understandably.
Right. I mean, and that's actually interesting to think about what would happen if they did merge, because they wouldn't be human in any recognizable sense. I mean, they would just have some fly DNA, presumably, but not just that, it would be two distinct people, three if you count the fly, in one body, or and the fly baby. The fly baby. Yeah, what am I saying? So you've got three distinct people and the fly joined together in one body. I mean, this is a monstrous thought. But maybe, I don't know. I don't know if I would want to share a body with you, Laura. Actually,
That's so rude.
Yeah.
That's so rude. No, this is unrelated, except for that I was just thinking about how our kiddo has like a bit of a confused understanding about DNA. And so he thinks everybody in a family has the same DNA. So he thinks if you're married, you have the same DNA.
Oh, nice.
Anyway.
Well, if you get genetically merged in the telepod,
he's just ahead of the times.
Yeah,
he
knows what's up.
He's got Brundle brain. He knows what's going on.
Laura, you wanted to talk a little bit about, just on the subject of Veronica, like some of Veronica's clothing, because you were really into the fashion.
Man,
This film
her wardrobe is really good.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite outfit?
Let's go through some of them. We can go through some of them so we can
okay, I'll give you some just so you don't have to try and bring this out of your head. This is just my quick notes.
I mean, the production design in this movie is just flush with 80s tropes, like giant ashtray and
her apartment is bonkers. There's all kinds of stuff.
Also,
in the background.
Stathis's office
with this little bar cart.
That was such a all that the like modern like 80s modern design, and I don't know what the word. I don't have the words to describe it.
I don't know either. My interior design language is not on point. But here's what I do know is that so Gina Davis, aka Ronnie, when we first see her, this might be my favorite one. She has a like duster length leather jacket, but it's like cut like a cardigan, and it has some pretty deep pockets that she's got her hands in, and then a really shiny silk purple shirt, and then I think she's got a black leather skirt, so it's sort of like a set, and then of course she's wearing stockings because that's she's going to put that stocking in the pod, so that's the one she's wearing at the party when she goes back to meet with him. I really like that really long leather pocketed sweater jacket, if you will. When she first sleeps with him, she has like a really long, oversized, silky shirt. But then when she like jumps on him, you realize that it's like got a secret paisley pattern. It's just like, it was just like in a sheen that you couldn't tell until it hit the light just right.
Doesn't after that she's wearing his shirt?
Yeah, after that she's wearing his shirt, but she's got her own paisley shirt.
All right, yeah.
That's longer and shinier. And then when they go out and he's screaming about cannolis, she's got a beret on, which is
the pink beret. Is very memorable for me.
So cute with her curly hair. She looks so good in berets.
They were actually dating at the time of the filming of the movie, FYI, and then they got married.
I know. I love that too. I didn't know that until after we watched it.
How long were they married? Do you know?
Like 3 years?
Not that long, I don't think.
They're a good match
because they couldn't end up being genetically fused, and so it didn't work out.
That was the problem. I think she was more into Fly Brundle than she was Brundle. But they're both so tall. Like, that Jeff Goldblum is super tall. Gina Davis is super tall. And then they're next to each other and you're like, man, yeah, they're both just like giants among the other, mere mortals.
They also have glorious curly hair.
They have very similar hairdos.
When we first meet Stathis in the offices of Particle, she's wearing some high-waisted trousers that might be like velour or velvet. They're kind of a chocolate color, but you can tell they've got like a nice sheen and a nap to them. And then she's got like a double-breasted houndstooth blazer, and then she's wearing Mary Jane shoes with socks. A move she'll also do later.
The socks is so contemporary.
Yes, I know it's modern, right? Or like, I mean, everything that's old news.
Can we pause here? So Becca, so you're clearly understanding what Laura's saying, right?
Yes, I am.
I'm not getting any of this. Like, if I didn't have like a picture, I would not have no idea what you're saying. Okay.
All right.
Continue.
Last one that I've got is when this is actually part of the outfit that has this paisley shirt. I didn't realize this, but when she's filming him, she's got kind of like a Fair Isle sweater on and with a little collar peeking out. It's like her like sort of business, it's like her documentarian outfit, I guess.
Okay.
And then that's what the silky shirt was underneath. And then when she walks home later, you realize she's got like a really big trench coat, like in the classic khaki color, and then gray plaid trousers, because everything's got to have like a pattern to it or like a texture. Like nothing is just like plain cotton on this lady. And then again, she's rocking the socks with the Mary Janes, but I think they're a different pair of Mary Janes.
All right, Becca. So what's your favorite outfit?
My favorite outfit, I think possibly the beret.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's definitely like the most memorable of the outfits for me. But she looks really I actually thought that the outfit that she wears with the high-waisted chocolate colored pants and the tweed blazer, I initially thought it was like a suit, which I like. Maybe it is a suit. I couldn't really tell, but I was like, that looks great.
Just like a really well put together separates, maybe if it's not a suit. I think that's my favorite one, actually. Her like her like I'm a serious science nonfiction journalist, people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so chic. I love it. It's very good cut. And his clothes are terribly cut. I don't know if that's worth noting.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got the Einstein suit.
Here's what I didn't notice, and I'm bummed that I didn't notice it though. What does he wear when he's out on the town as like Brundlefly? Just pounding chocolate.
Because so she buys him like new clothing, which I guess is another sort of potent
she buys
like
him
metaphor
the leather
for his
jacket.
transformation. Yeah, and she buys him this like really hip leather jacket. And so when he's starting to become Brundlefly, first of all, his skin is like breaking out in like boils or something. He's like about to have fly skin. But so he puts on like the leather jacket with like no shirt and he like goes out to seduce this woman in a bar.
I also like that he's trying to get her in the pod, and she's also like, nah, that's not me. Like, no lady wants to go in the pod, but he's like, it'll make you feel sexy. And she's like, I already feel sexy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't need that, Seth.
Yeah. Also, like, what are we gonna do? Have sex all day, all the time? Like, that's basically all you're asking here for at this point, because he's like basically, you can't keep up with my insane sexual desires. Anyway.
Yeah, I should have read about like flies and their like sexual habits, because I mean, it did seem like David Cronenberg did some research into like what it would be like anatomically to be a fly.
Yeah.
Because he eats things by like vomiting acid on them and liquefying them, which is one of the movie's grossest details. But I was like, I didn't realize that flies just like we're fucking all the time. Like, I feel like I see flies and they're not doing that. I don't know.
I didn't know that part either.
You don't see the flies having sex?
Just everywhere all the time.
Yeah. just banging. Like little fly orgies. I did know the vomiting thing because our kid has been bringing home a lot of bug books from the library. Okay. So I just read to him about the vomiting, actually. So that's something that's foremost in my mind. But I was also kind of interpreting, like, they have really short lives, right? Yeah. So I was thinking, like, he's like feeling really great because it's like day one of fly life. Right. And then like, it's like when you can whack the fly with the fly swatter because it's like, they're not moving as fast as they used to.
Day two of fly it's like
not great.
He's in middle age.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly. He looks old. Like when she sees him, when she goes back to his like apartment after they've had their break or whatever, he's using a walker. Yeah. This is before he can like stick to the feeling and stuff. But so like the aging metaphor is like made visually explicit, and like his hair is falling out too. And then his ears fall off and his teeth fall out.
The aging thing really hit me. I told Justin this already, but like when she's like, you have some weird hairs on your back. And he's like, well, what happens to us all when we age. I'm kind of a hairless boy. And then she goes, they're really coarse. Because that's also something that like I've got like a beauty mark. And that's what you call a freckle on your face, people, when you call it a beauty mark. But it is just started sprouting like a big black hair all of a sudden that it didn't do for the first 35 years of my life. And I was like, what is this? What is this?
Could be about to get really gross.
Yeah.
Watch out.
Have you been going through any telepods recently?
I don't know. Keep an eye on it.
One other thing I want to mention about his transformation that I think is I thought was really interesting is the iconography when he comes out of the pod. He's like Tarzan. So he comes out of the pod. He's got the barrel chest, shirtless. And then the first thing that happens is the baboon runs and jumps in his arms, and he's like kind of like posing like that. And so I was like, why would they frame him like Tarzan? And then I was thinking the other thing that happens to him as he's, becomes more fly-like is he talks about the flies as being de-evolved creatures. Like they're...
Have you ever heard of insect politics? Neither have I. Insects don't have politics. They're very brutal. No compassion. No compromise. We can't trust the insect.
You know, and he's sort of saying to her when he's warning Veronica, he's like, I'm sort of losing control of myself. So he's de-evolving back to a more primitive form in a way of man. Like he's becoming more of like an ape or you know, anyway, he's becoming a fly obviously, but he's becoming more animalistic. And so he's lost, or he begins to lose that ability to self-regulate through rationality. And I do think that is interesting that you could think of the transformation. It's both aging, but it's also like he's de-evolving into this creature of like this more sort of primitive being. And he's losing the thing that was most important to him, namely like his intellect, his ability to reason and kind of control the world through mental activity and categorization and so on. And, you know, I'm not sure exactly how to make of that. It did remind me a little bit of, we just covered on the podcast recently, Altered States, which is a film in which a guy tries to basically, through sensory deprivation and LSD, go back in time to the first hominid and like become that. He basically becomes that. It doesn't really make sense, but it's very cool. And there's this sort of obsession with finding the original sort of human. And in a way, I was thinking about him as like de-evolving into this more sort of original human species. I don't know if like that was something that resonated with you guys, but anyway, it was something I was thinking about this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting that like the instrument of his de-evolution is like this extremely high-tech, futuristic thing. And it's interesting also that in the end, when he has devolved fully into not just animality, but like this very unevolved kind of creature, a fly, he also is merged with a machine.
Yeah.
He wants to be merged with Gina Davis, with Ronnie, so that he can, and with the baby, so that he can become more human. But instead, what happens is he ends up getting merged with one of the telepods. And so in his final moments, he's kind of a fly machine hybrid. So I mean, speaking of Gothic narratives, I guess this is making me think that it's kind of like Frankenstein, like a tale of aspirations to control everything via technology gone like horribly awry. And instead of the technology launching us into progress, it de-evolves us.
Yeah.
completely.
Yeah. By chance in this way. And I think, again, that speaks to your point about the sort of unpredictability and randomness of these transformative experiences. That it's sort of not, you know, it's not like this thing was designed in such a way to create such a being. It's designed to just interpret whatever's put into it. It's just that he doesn't realize what's put into it. You know, that's where things sort of have gone wrong.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Well, it's just that we don't know what transformation will bring, which is what our characters in Altered States and in this movie sort of fail to understand completely. Like, and doesn't he say like the first line of the movie, "I'm inventing something or I'm working on something that will change the world forever"?
Yes.
Yeah. And he just doesn't understand the nature of that change.
Exactly.
But it does.
He does say that later. He says, "I didn't realize. I thought I was inventing a teleporter, but I actually am inventing a gene splicer."
A gene splicer.
That's what he. So he's because he really thinks it's going to cure the world of the greatest ill, which is that we can't instantaneously go from A to B. Because
I mean, he thinks it's going to cure the world of physicality and like all of the obstacles that physicality imposes, but instead it imposes this like particularly burdensome like physicality on him.
Yeah.
In a horrible, ironic twist.
Yes.
Yeah. I like that line in your book, by the way, where you said something about like when in lust our bodies become unruly and we have to reckon with them. It's like, he doesn't want to have to. I'm sorry, is that weird for me to quote you back?
No, that's fine.
But
wow, I did write that.
You did, but but I feel like this character Seth, like he really doesn't want to have to reckon with the physical, not just like in terms of like the sexual, but like clothing himself, expressing himself, being an embodied, being an embodied person, and this is
showering too, because she's like, you smell weird, because he's like turning into a fly, and he's like, I've never bathed a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He just wants to live in his mind, and the fly has other plans.
It's too bad this guy didn't have access to the internet. I think he would have had a really good time being in the metaverse, hanging out with Zuckerberg.
Yeah, for sure. He could have been spared all this.
I know.
But it's ultimately good for him, I think, to become a fly. It's better to shoot your shot and miss horribly than to never attempt self-transcendence.
Yeah. And he did have 48 hours of kind of freedom.
I feel, yeah.
And and maybe that's more than most of us, so I don't know. Becca, so tell us, so the book is All Things Are Too Small, Essays in Praise of Excess. So there's the Marie Kondo essay is hilarious and great and full of these little, all these things that, you point out a lot of fascinating things in particular about like what is the name of that movement? The Marie Kondo, I would just call it the Marie Kondo movement. What is it like?
I mean, she's careful to distinguish herself from minimalism. I mean, I read her as if she were like an academic text, so carefully that it's like embarrassing. But like, I mean, she basically just is like a minimalist, like a declutterer, even though she says that she's unlike all the other declutterers. Yeah.
But yeah, you find all these interesting threads. I'm just focusing on this essay because I thought it was hilarious. But there's all these threads in these gurus and where they are sort of taken to the logical extreme and they kind of are show themselves to be absurd. And then you claw back this idea, throughout I mean, again, I've only gotten like a few chapters in, but where you're ultimately moving towards a kind of space in our lives, an argument for a space in our lives for excess. And do you want to just say a little bit about that, just to give people a sense of what the book in general is about? And
yeah, sure. It's a defense of different, or a celebration and a defense of a wide range of kinds of excess. But I guess that pre-transformation Brundle, I'm realizing throughout the course of this conversation, is kind of a good emblem of the way of thinking about personhood that I oppose. He, at the beginning of the movie, kind of wants to shed his physicality. He doesn't want to have to waste time thinking about any superfluities. He doesn't have any art in his studio. It's full of just utilitarian things. He really wants to pare his life down, like just to the essentials. And he doesn't have any human relationships. He basically lives in like utter solitude. And so my book is kind of a celebration of all of the superfluous things that you don't need to survive, but that make you who you are and make you an interesting person. Your relationships with other people, the things with which you fill your house. My house, as you guys can see right now, because we're on Zoom, is like full of books and crap, mementos that other people give you, art, which isn't really for anything, isn't useful for anything, cool outfits, which we've been celebrating, even though they're not like for anything. They make life worth living. So yeah, that is what the book is about in short. And so there's like essays against mindfulness, essays against Marie Kondo, and like a bunch of writing about sex.
It's wonderful. People should check it out. All Things Are Too Small. Becca, is there anything else? Where can people read you other than the book, or find you online if they want to hear more about your thoughts about excess and other things?
I have a Substack. I feel like it's not as good as writing that I think about more carefully and edit, but it's where my unfiltered thoughts appear. It's called A Fet Worse Than Death, like fet like a party, Fete. And then I write for the Washington Post a lot, supposedly every week, although it doesn't always work out that way. I edit a magazine called The Point, and I write for them sometimes, and I will write another book someday soon.
Excellent. And you said you're watching one horror movie a day. What is the last, besides The Fly, what's the last one you saw?
The Devil's Backbone, a Guillermo del Toro movie, which I did not love, actually. I don't think it's great. I try to watch all new ones every October.
Yeah,
oh, wow.
That's
okay,
great.
yeah, that's a big task.
I have not seen that. Neither that nor, what is the other one of his, that's the early one, Kronos or whatever. I have not seen those. But
I don't love it. I think it's actually pretty kind of like generic, forgettable movie. Don't recommend.
They're not all winners.
We watched Annabelle. So we were like slowly working our way through the Conjuring series because we're way behind. And Annabelle is the second of the Conjuring series in release order. And I thought it was fine. I thought it was pretty good. Yeah.
I feel like we end up mixing in oldies and goodies, like, because we just have to like revisit The Exorcist like once every couple of years, and The Shining once every couple of years, and so those get sprinkled in with the stuff that we haven't seen before. Right. It's ambitious to do 31 days ish of new films to you.
I've missed a couple already because I like went camping and I was like, there's just no way.
It's allowed.
I'm gonna have to like have a day at the end where I watch like 4 in one day or something.
Yeah. Well, like in your quest against against minimalism? Is there also a quest against like rigidity? You know, who needs to hold themselves to such a, you know, it's just like,
true.
It's just a fun activity.
Yeah.
But for a horror movie day, it could be a good day.
It could be.
Yeah, maximalist day.
It could be. Thank you so much for being here, Becca. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was really fun.
Time.
Thank you so much.
And in 2 weeks, we'll be talking to Matt Stroll about the film Song to Song. So we'll see you then. Bye.